me and my partner, I had a truck, and because I had a truck, higher profile, I was going to be the main point of contact for the target to pinch him in wherever he landed. And my sergeant also had a truck, and then everyone else was going to be support, ground surveillance, and all that. So as we're going, playing the game, our target shows up in a red Pontiac, and a white Chrysler pulls into a convenience store on the corner, together. One of the surveillance on the across the street recognized, hey, I think our target just showed up. So everyone in both vehicles go into the convenience store, come back out, and now our target is in the white Buick with some unknown people. And at this point, they hadn't even made contact with our informant to say that they were there. They actually started running counter surveillance in the area, running through the parking lot just to see if there was police there or anything like that. They finally ended up landing into a parking spot, and the decision from my sergeant was like, all right, everyone's in place. Yes, move. And backing up even before that, the training that we were on this squad, the U.S. Marshals, and I'm going to throw his name out, Matt Hershey, who is one of the now premier instructors in I think it's Glencoe, Georgia, for the U.S. Marshals, was part of the U.S. Marshals group here in Phoenix, and would consistently lead us through really good training. Vehicle containments and shooting and stuff like that. So we had been doing some really good training leading up to this event. So decision was made to move, and I have a white Chevy truck with lights in it. My partner's on the side, and as soon as we hit the vehicle, all their doors will open and people start running, and the driver has a gun. He starts shooting over his shoulder at me. And so I move out, return fire, and in the meantime, I caught a bullet in the leg.
Welcome to the Transition Drill Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Pantiani. I appreciate you taking the time to watch. So let's get into this.
What I like is the message for like resiliency and preparing, because I feel like my whole life and definitely my law enforcement career was all resiliency. It was get knocked down, get back up, get knocked down, get back up, and then prepare for, life after. And so it's pretty cool. I have some stuff in my head that I was like, man, and I didn't even start thinking about it till recently, about just little things that happened at the beginning of my career that helped lead me to all my past, which is kind of cool, the resiliency part of it.
When you say got knocked down, like knocked down in a bad way?
Tested multiple times for law enforcement and got denied.
Got it.
Finally gets hired, and then got to an agency, and then maybe that's not the best agency, so I went to another agency and then had to start from the beginning again. And all that stuff like that just helped build me to where I was at, and then getting shot and doing all that stuff and having to, go through all that stuff. So, and even before that, just growing up with my parents and stuff, and I'll talk about it. But
you bring up a great point though about the evaluating as you go. And I think for a lot of our other brothers and sisters who are in law enforcement or any first responder agency, we tend to get trapped, or we tend to feel trapped. And all of a sudden you get a little bit of seniority and you're like, I don't really like it here, but I'm not happy. And it takes a huge amount of courage to go, you know what? I think I'm going to look somewhere else, and I'm going to start over. I'm going to end up back at the bottom, but I'm going to start over because ultimately it's going to be better for me and it's going to be better for my family. And I think for a lot of us, we don't get encouraged to do that from the get-go. From the get-go, it's sign on the dotted line, give this agency 20 or 30 years, and just grin and bear it. Mm-hmm. And that really is the wrong way to go about that approach.
Yeah. Yeah. So, even within my career, getting taken off of squads, and for whatever reason, political reason, someone doesn't like you, and then just not getting jaded and not getting disenchanted, and just being able to get back up and go to the next squad, and then test for sergeant, go back to the street, right? And graveyard shift, nights and weekends and all that stuff, and starting over. And it just builds you up. And then later in my career, I really, really wanted to give back, which is why I tested for sergeant. Is I had a really good career. I did a lot of cool things. Now it's time for me to give back. And I really, really do believe in that. And that's currently what I'm doing as well, teaching. So,
and that's almost a cliched response, because I know, again, going back to a lot of people that we work with, when you mention promoting, there's a lot of them who look at it negatively. Oh, you're just you're drinking the Kool-Aid, you're becoming a company person or whatever.
Right.
And the best way to look at it, though, is you have the opportunity to make the organization better, because you now have impact on others and you can help them become better, which ultimately makes the whole organization better.
Absolutely.
And I know that for a lot of people, they don't look at it that way. But for me, what I try to tell people is, think about how much knowledge you have, and by just holding on to it and not sharing it and not imparting that wisdom on others, how you're impacting your organization long term. Because you're going to leave, but how much more of a positive impact could you have if you had promoted up and tried to change or be a voice of positive for a culture change?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's really why I wanted it. I was like, all right, I looked at it this way, and some of the squads I was at, if I could put 4 or 5 people in, bad guys in prison a year, cool, myself. But if I could teach people and teach 5, 6 more, it just exponentially grows to those guys learn the same techniques. Now they could put more people that need to go to prison in prison. That was my mindset, is to be able to share that so that they can grow, and then hopefully they do the same thing as they go on their career. So,
well, let's take it back to the beginning then.
Okay.
Talk to me about the young you. First off, where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona, small town, northern Arizona, mountain town, if you will.
Nice and warm up there.
Yeah. Beautiful place to grow up. And I got there by way of my parents both attending Northern Arizona University, but in the 60s when they were there, it was named Arizona State College, and it was a teacher's college. And my dad grew up in Northern Arizona. He was from Williams, and even going back, my family on my dad's side was ranchers in New Mexico. They had come up from Mexico, were in New Mexico, and then when ranching kind of started dwindling down in the early 1900s, they got on with the railroad and ended up in Arizona. And so my father grew up in Williams, Arizona, which is about 35 miles away from Flagstaff, where he was an athlete and went to school and played baseball, and then ultimately stayed there, got a teaching degree. And then my mom went to NAU, and that's where they met. And so they both got teaching jobs. My dad was the baseball coach at the high school. And so growing up, I was Coach Garcia's kid. And I was the bat boy from 5 years old on for the high school team. And it was just a great place to grow up. But none of my family, my father, my grandparents, no one was in the military or in law enforcement. I didn't have anyone that guided me there, but had really good positive experience growing up in Flagstaff, small town, hunting and fishing, and then playing baseball. And my dad had the opportunity to go to coach in Grand Junction, Colorado at a college there that at the time it was Mesa State College, and he was a pitching coach. So I followed him partly because my mom didn't like the teenage Craig, and he was more like, hey, go live with your dad. And I was like, all right, cool. I get to go play baseball and go check out a new environment. And so I went up to Grand Junction, Colorado with him and went to high school there.
Were your parents divorced at this point? At
that point, yes, they were. And I have a younger brother. He stayed with my mom. But I went with my dad, and talking about the start of resiliency, it was a complete shock to my system. To everything I knew everyone, all my friends, everything. And now I have to start over with new friends and a new school and learn the system there. And looking back, it was really, really scary, but I'm really glad that I did it. And me and my father had a better relationship because of that, I believe, because it was just me and him.
And you made this move as a young teenager?
Yeah.
Or 13,
like
14. So basically just as you were going into high school.
Absolutely.
The most awkward time
Correct.
to make a complete 100% change.
Yep. In a whole nother state. And so it was definitely, like I said, scary. But baseball was what kept me grounded. And so once I got on with the athletics and started playing, meeting more friends and stuff like that, and it was a really good time. And then my dad, after I graduated from high school, got the head coaching job down here in Arizona at South Mountain Community College. And so I followed him and played for him in college. 3 years, I redshirted 1 year. So growing up, it was sports.
Were your aspirations to take baseball into a professional career?
Absolutely. My aspirations were to graduate from high school. And then in 1988, there was the Olympic Games in Seoul, South Korea. That was my goal. I wanted to be on the Olympic team. But unfortunately, I didn't necessarily want to practice as much as I should have, and wanted to spend time with the friends and do all that thing and still play baseball, but I didn't dedicate like I should have. And I really don't think I had the physical tools either. In my brain, I thought I did, but reality wasn't there. So I wanted to play baseball. That was it. And went to college, and then got injured a couple times in junior college. My shoulder, I had to have surgery on my rotator cuff. And then also reality set in for financially is like, well.
Were you a pitcher as well? Because you mentioned your dad was a pitching coach.
He was a pitching coach. So I pitched and I played middle infield, shortstop, second base. And because I like to hit. So I didn't want to just be straight pitching because I like to hit. And so I did both. And he guided me. He was never really a pressure type dad where you have to do this, you have to do this. He kind of let me grow as I went on, which I do appreciate. But our relationship was straight sports, and that was it. And so then I graduated, and it was, do I go on to try to play baseball at some other university, or do I get a job and go into the real world? And I made a decision to get a job. And so I started working for a discount tire company at 21 years old.
And what year is this?
This was in 1990.
Okay.
I did 3 years, one redshirt year. And then in 1990, I went to discount tire company, walked in the door and said, hey, I need a job, and got hired. And changing tires, dirty all day long. One of the best decisions I ever made, because I learned camaraderie. I learned how to work hard, customer service, and the customer service aspect of that completely translated once I did get into law enforcement. Being able to handle people's, problems and make good decisions and try to help them. And so I worked for Discount Tire Company for about 6 or 7 years, and then moved up to Utah. I had met a girl, and we moved up to Utah where her family was at. Went to school to become a EMT, and then decided, let's go back to Arizona. It's a little cold here. And so we moved back to Arizona in 1996, went back to work for Discount Tire Company. And then we bought a house here in Gilbert, Arizona. And my next door neighbor happened to be working for the Mesa Police Department. And he was on an undercover capacity. He works for they called it SCAT, Special Crimes Apprehension Team. And new development, we got to be friends and just started talking to him about law enforcement and started getting really interested in that. And so I started testing. And this was in the late 90s that I started testing for law enforcement.
Prior to that, though, real quick, what was the draw to being an EMT?
I wanted to get in as a first responder. and I didn't know if it was law enforcement or fire department. And the college in Orem, Utah, had a good program that I could take to become an EMT. And then I figured if I wanted to get on as a fire department, that would be a good path to go. Plus, I thought it was cool training anyway, just for life experience.
But just like you previously said, where there was really nobody in your growing up years, law enforcement, military, anybody in the medical field or
No.
So everything you've kind of done has just kind of been on your own path and
Correct.
your own journey.
Absolutely. Yep.
I'd like to go back real quick, though.
Sure.
You mentioned your dad moved from Mexico to New Mexico to Arizona. And for those that don't follow baseball, there's no pro teams in and around that. What drew your dad to baseball?
He played sports, basketball, baseball, football, all growing up, but baseball was his, for whatever reason, he really, really enjoyed. And it was at a small town, Williams, Arizona. And he had a really good arm. And so he was a good pitcher. And so that's where, as Little League, he threw a no-hitter, and then he just really enjoyed baseball. And went from Williams, Arizona to Arizona State University as a small town kid, walked on. He tells the story. He was like, there was all these people and they were all good. And so he spent 1 year there and then went back up to NAU, and they had a program there, and he finished his high school career at NAU, or his college career, I should say, as a pitcher at NAU.
Way back then, did ASU have a powerhouse baseball team like they do today?
Just starting to get there. The coach, he said, was it was an older coach. He'd been there for a long time, and the coach that succeeded him was Jim Brock, who was one of the longest running coaches for Arizona, and he's the one that really built it into a powerhouse. And so it was before he showed up there. That's when my dad was there.
So before you guys went to Colorado, would going to watch an ASU game be what would be the family outing as opposed to going to a pro game?
Correct. Other than spring training, we'd go down to spring training. And I can remember going down to spring training and sitting as a little kid with all the old Oakland A's. And I remember Billy Martin was there, and like all these pro players that at the time I didn't really know who they were. It was just really cool to be around the baseball players during spring training.
Well, it's spring training. Half of them aren't going to be on the team when the season starts anyway.
But yes, to back to what you were saying, Arizona State, that was the team that we would go watch as little kids. So I remember coming down to the Valley from Flagstaff and watching Arizona State play. That was the team that I aspired to play for at some point. Yeah.
So what year did you come on law enforcement?
I started in law enforcement. I started testing, like I said, at the end of the 90s. And down here, or in Arizona at the time, there was agencies were hiring, but only like 2 or 3 positions. And so there was a big, it was hard to get on. So 300-400 people for 2 or 3 positions. And it was really, really competitive. And I ended up testing for Chandler Police Department, Gilbert Police Department, Arizona DPS, and get right to the last cut, and then just didn't make it. So I had a friend that told me about a Indian reservation that was close by to here that was brand new, starting up, and they were going to be state certified, federal certified, tribal certified, and they were hiring at a higher rate than some of the local agencies were to try to get people in there.
Just because they were just starting out?
Absolutely. And so I was like, all right, I can't hurt not to test. So I tested. This was April of 2000, April 1st of 2000. Tested, took the physical, written, and everything in one day, and they got the background done, and I was hired and in the academy a month later.
Wow.
They fast-tracked it. And so I ended up going to the police academy down in Central Arizona. The academy was Carlotta, Central Arizona Regional Law Officer Training Academy. And they had room and board there. They had dorms, and we would stay there during the week, and then on the weekend we could go home.
Were you a paid employee at that point, or were you paying your way?
I was a paid employee at that point. Signed a contract. They gave us all our tools, equipment, and here you go. Had not met anyone in the police department other than my background investigator. That was the only person I met. They didn't have us do ride-alongs or do anything like that. And so I knew the background investigator, and that was it. And then I went to the police academy. And it was with a lot of the smaller agencies around Arizona. I want to say there's like 25, 26 of us in the class. And it was a good time because at that point, I was already 30 years old. And so I had some life experience under my belt. And like I said, the discount tire, customer service. And so I felt like that was a good thing for me because I had that life. It wasn't, I was 21 years old looking like, oh, crud, what's this going to be? And so I thought it was fun. I was going back to college as far as I was concerned and exercising and doing stuff and learning it. So I really enjoyed and I understood, that part of the game, the structure and the paramilitaristic and it was good on that end. But then I came out and it's like, all right, now what's going to go on? And I had no clue other than what the, academy taught me on what to even expect.
How big was that agency just starting out?
We had about 80 sworn officers total. And even a brand new police chief had came in and they were working on getting all their policies and procedures and trying to get CALIA certifications and stuff like that. And so it was interesting, but they treated us well, and we got paid, like I said, pretty good compared to all the other agencies around the valley.
That initial starting out, I would imagine most of your sergeants and above were all laterals from surrounding agencies.
Yeah, there was a couple of local meaning they were from the tribe, and they had been part of the Bureau of Indian Affairs policing before they pulled out, and then they created their own. And they were just left over from there. So I had a mix of some of the local tribal police and then a lot of new people coming in that were laterals. Yeah.
Going back, what was your family's thought on you becoming a cop?
My mom was not a big fan of it. Obviously, mothers like to protect their sons, and that was completely foreign from what I've ever done. My dad he supported everything that I ever did. I can remember even going back to when I was a young, early 20s, stupid kid, and I did bull riding for a short period of time. And my dad, he'd come out and watch me, never really told me one way or another whether he liked it or not. He just supported me. And that was our relationship.
How long did that last?
It lasted for as long as it took me to get kicked in the side of the head from a bull. I probably did it for about a year, thinking that I was young and indestructible. And then I got into the gate one time and the bull wasn't looking, and then they used a cattle prod to shoot it, and then he jumped out and I wasn't ready, and I went right over the top and got kicked. And that was the only time I can remember ever seeing the Tweety Bird and the stars going around my head. And I ended up in the hospital, and after that I was like, yeah, I'm done. So that was very short-lived.
And this is going to sound like a very rhetorical question, but what's the sensation like getting on the back of a 2,500 pound beast?
It is scary part. Your hair's on fire and you just have this big animal that is so much stronger than you. They can toss you around at any point in time, and you just hold on for dear life. You really do. And I had a couple of good successful rides, but for the most part, I didn't have anyone teaching me. We were just, me and my friends were kind of go out and doing it on our own, and thought we were going to be cowboys and get on the circuit. And that was what we were going to do, because that came along with that came girls. And so that was if they like us because we're doing this, maybe we should continue to do this, not really thinking of everything,
all the broken
bones and cuts and bruises, and had knee surgery from jumping off. But it was pretty crazy just to think that I even did that.
Taking you back now to you're going through the academy at 30 years old. I would imagine that almost kind of was a little bit of a double-edged sword, in the sense that you were kind of expected to be an unofficial leader just because of your age and experience, or did they tend to kind of leave you alone and focus more on the younger kids?
No, I actually, they think there was 4 of us that were like team leaders, if you will, within the group. And I ended up being one of them for probably 5 or 6, maybe even 7 other cadets that were there. So they selected some of us, and one of the other ones that was a team leader was prior military and structure, and so he had been through basic training before. Now he was doing this, and then another one had lateraled from Department of Corrections and had already been through Department of Corrections Academy. So they kind of selected us that way.
Coming out, starting at that organization, how long did you last there? And how soon, more importantly, how soon did you start thinking, I want to go to another organization?
Wow. I lasted 3 years there, going out of the academy and then went into the field training. That was like a shock in itself, because one, it was a different culture. It was on a Native American reservation that I'm not familiar with. And now we're having to enforce laws to people that don't even want us there because we're not tribal members. And so that part of it was different. And I can remember right off the bat, I'm like, oh, I can handle this. This is good. And I enjoy this. But I tell the story, one of the not to get into like war stories, but this was my come to, hey, this is the real world. And I was on FTO, first phase, we're working great graveyard shift, and someone, hey, there's a car accident down the road, and it was a very rural road that led into the mountains, and we show up there in the middle of the night, and there was a car there with beer cans and boxes spread around. All the doors are open. It had been in a wreck, and no people were around. And we looked to the back seat, and there was a child's car seat in the back. So now our first thought was, oh, people got ejected. We started looking around, and there's no one around. And shortly after that, we hear crying in the distance, and this is desert area. So we started going towards the crying, and it kept going, and probably a half a mile away in the wash was a 1-year-old child. What had happened was Dad was partying with friends, had to watch the child, and wrecked. So I thought, oh, the cops are coming. I'm going to take the kid. He dumped the kid in a wash and took off and just left him there. And the story I like to tell young officers, I'm like, if it was 5 minutes later, because the fire department showed up there with their big trucks and noise, we would have never heard that child.
Got it.
And that was I can remember very distinctly, that was you're in the real world now. This is what you have to expect going forward. And it was just like a shock, because I had never been a part of anything like that growing up. And they could prepare you in the police academy for some stuff, but not like real world things where people die. And so I remember that distinctly. And then to answer your question going forward, I really enjoyed learning and got into my groove about year 2. But then looking at financially, they didn't have a pay structure where there was any steps. So after 4 or 5 years, I could be at the same pay rate. They didn't have any structure for step increases to go forward, no max out. And so it was just kind of very unorthodox. And I wanted to have that structure.
So were they were more based on let's offer more money on the front end to get you in the door, but no real projection for pay raises.
Nope.
Going forward.
Nope. And there was no, you're going to max out at X amount of dollars. And then if you promote to sergeant or whatever, this is what there was none of that. So it just seemed really odd to me that they didn't have that structure in place. And I also wanted more. I got the taste of law enforcement. I'm like, man, I'd really like to get into, canine or do other different things. And it was just a smaller department that didn't have a whole lot of different avenues that I could go in my career.
That early on in your career, I know you mentioned having a neighbor who was Mesa PD. Did you have somebody who was already kind of a mentor for you and looking at the long-term picture of your law enforcement career?
I did. My next door neighbor, and then I had another friend that worked. He was a highway patrolman for Arizona Department of Public Safety, and me and him had been friends for a while. And so I had him kind of giving me advice and helping me along, mentoring me. And then my next door neighbor, he's like, hey, I'll put you in touch with a background investigator whenever you want. And finally he did. At about year 3, at the tribal agency, I was ready to move on to a different, and I looked at Mesa Police Department. I looked at a couple of Phoenix Police Department, and the background investigator for Mesa, I clicked with right off the bat. And so I started the process there, and then ultimately got hired there in June of 2003.
Did they acknowledge your academy time, or did they make you back through the academy?
They did acknowledge it, so it was a straight lateral, and which was good. Straight lateral, and I believe I came in about this, as the beginning pay for Mesa is about the same as what I was at, so it wasn't a big transition financially. But I did have to go through field training again, which was not a big deal because it was I had to learn their system. I had to learn all the roads and codes and all that stuff like that. So I'm glad I did have to go through that.
You ultimately did how many years with Mesa? With
Mesa, I ended up doing 18 years with Mesa.
And we talked previously about your desire to promote, to be able to give back. When did you start seeing that mindset shift, in the sense of, all right, I've learned a lot and I've gained a lot, but now I want to be able to give it back? Did that come naturally for you, or did you have other influences kind of pushing you along?
It did not come naturally. And my career, when I did get to the Mesa Police Department, I just wanted to try to do anything I could. I wanted to be on SWAT. I wanted to do maybe K9. We had our own armorers there. We had our own helicopter unit. I was like, I want to do everything if I could.
Same as every young officer.
Yes, absolutely.
How many different assignments can I work?
Exactly. And you start doing ride-alongs with this group, or this group. And I really connected with, I really wanted to do undercover work. And so I'm on Mesa about 3.5, 4 years. Now I'm in law enforcement close to 6 years or so. And they opened up a squad that's called the Major Felon Unit. And it was because we had our whole intel group dismantled when we got a new police chief that came in from outside. And so they wanted to create a new intel unit. They created this squad to help track some of the bad fugitives, and then the halfway houses in Mesa. We had so many halfway houses. And so all the people coming out of prison there. I tested for it and got lucky and got selected for this squad. And there was 2 brand new off patrol, and I was one of them. And then some of the other guys were seasoned detectives that had already been in undercover work and stuff like that. They mentored me. So I'm getting to your question, but they mentored me. And I can remember the first email getting from one of them is, hey, never burn your bridges. Stay in touch with all the people on patrol that you worked with. You're going to need that connection with them at some point in time. And then they proceeded to teach, surveillance, undercover operations. And I got this really, really good experience training from these seasoned detectives that some of them were 18, 19 years on the job and had been doing it for a long time. And from there, I ended up getting removed from the squad. I did a bonehead move, and I invited someone who was also in law enforcement. We were getting ready to go to training one day, but we had to go do a operation to take a GPS tracker off of a vehicle, and I invited her to come with me. She's a sworn law officer. I figured there was no big deal. I didn't
not a member of your organization.
Not a member of our organization, and so because of that, I screwed up, and I knew I screwed up. I owned it. Ultimately, they removed me from the squad, and I went back to patrol. And no big deal. I'm like, without reading Jocko's book, Extreme Ownership, I kind of figured it out. I'm like, hey, if you own your stuff, people will respect you a little bit more. And so I did. And I'm like, all right, well, I want to get back to that as soon as I can. So then I started testing for the gang unit and for other stuff like that. Still, I didn't burn my bridges with even that group. It was a management decision. They're going to do what they're going to do. I can't do anything about it. I'm just going to stay positive and keep going. And so then I tested for the gang unit, and I got onto the gang unit in 2010, and then was a case carrying gang detective, which led me to a career criminal squad detective, ATF task force, and then ultimately, I think it was that training I got from those senior detectives. So then once I get to about 15 years on, I was like, you know what? Now it's time for me to start giving back. And that's when a couple other things happened in between on my career, and I'll talk about that. But when I did promote to sergeant, that was my mentality was, hey, I want to give back. I want to try to teach some young guys what I learned.
Well, I definitely want to hear about the couple other incidents, but what you say, about the taking ownership, I think for all of us, we all can look back in our careers and those moments where you got your legs kicked out from underneath you, and it's real easy to stand back up and start pointing and blaming other people. It's their fault. It's their fault. And I am no way trying to say that I had my own experiences with that. But once you cross that bridge and can really stand up and go, okay, the first thing I need to do is look at myself and what did I screw up on and how can I improve going forward? Absolutely. And for you to be able to see that, and take that ownership, that's I really think what makes our careers better is the sooner we can get to that point and realize that we have as much of a hand in things that go wrong, you could say, as anybody else does.
Absolutely. And I feel like because of that, I gained more respect from the guys that I was working with, because I was like, hey, I screwed this up, guys. My bad. And I remember having a briefing with those guys, and I'm like, whatever happens, happens. I can't control that, but what I control is my attitude. And I think that was going back to my baseball training with my dad. And he always really preached attitude, have a good attitude, have a good attitude, have a good attitude. And people will respect that and gravitate towards you. And unbeknownst to me, I did it. And so then, it really did help me in that, hey, my career's not over. You can sit there and pound your feet and your head and point, like you said, point fingers at staff and this and sergeants and everybody like that. They're out to get me. And it's not that, you can get beyond that.
Well, and the other thing too, for somebody listening who might be thinking, what was the big deal? But you really have to remove yourself from it. And you exposed your organization and her organization to some major liability. Because my guess is, I'm probably reading between the lines, she didn't let her organization know she was going out with you to recover this tracker. So if something goes to hell in a handbasket, worst case scenario, you guys are involved in a gun battle, you now got two organizations, and neither one of those administrations knew that the other was participating.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's just a huge liability.
Huge liability. And call it naiveness. When you're young in your career, you don't think about the liability at past.
You're not looking at the big picture.
No, not at all. And then obviously, as I get later in my career, the decisions I had to make were based off of that. And now I had to import, hey, this is why I'm making this decision. It has nothing to do with what you did. Look at the big picture.
You're like, I'm a sergeant now, and I remember the dumb stuff
Absolutely.
I did. Please don't do that.
Absolutely. So I don't blame that. I learned from it. You learn, you grow, you get over it, and you hopefully do better stuff.
Now, you mentioned some other experiences in your career that were kind of pivotal or teaching moments for you.
Yeah. So I had transitioned from the gang unit to, they called it the career criminal squad. And we were also an ATF task force, and we worked alongside the U.S. Marshals task force. So U.S. Marshals, fugitive hunters, if they ended up catching their fugitive and there was some search warrants or follow-up investigations, whatever, we would take on the investigative arm of that. And then we were also in charge of keeping track of the career criminals within the city that were coming in out of DOC. And so it was a really fun squad, really good. And I mean, it was a mix from, homicide investigations to narcotics investigation. It was a wealth of everything. And I really liked that squad. So Fast forward to January of 2012, and we're sitting in the office one day, and one of the guys on my squad who liked to work informants, he had tons of informants. He gets a call from one of his informants. Hey, one of the guys you're looking for that has a Department of Corrections warrant, I could buy drugs from him. And so he's selling meth, and I could buy from him. What do you want me to do? And so we ended up making a plan that we were going to use the informant to order up drugs from the guy who had the warrant, and we were going to get him to a location, and then we were going to arrest him. Easy peasy. Now, after all these years, there's never a perfect plan. And you probably are very well aware of that. And there's never a perfect plan. And so we had enough resources. We debriefed it, and our target was known to run from the police, whether it's on foot, in a car. He was not going to stop. That wasn't part of and now he has a warrant, so we knew that he wasn't going to stop. So the plan was to get him to a location, identify him, pinch him in, contain him. We had probably 14 or 15 detectives in undercover capacity in the area, and that was the plan. But just like most narcotics investigations, if you set a 5 o'clock time, it doesn't go at 5 o'clock. It never goes as planned.
Dopers don't wear a watch.
No, it's just game after game after game. Oh, I'll be right there. I'm right around the corner. You know, that game. And so me and my partner, I had a truck, and because I had a truck, higher profile, I was going to be the main point of contact for the target to pinch him in wherever he landed. And my sergeant also had a truck, and then everyone else was going to be support, ground surveillance, and all that. So as we're going, playing the game, our target shows up in a red Pontiac, and a white Chrysler pulls into a convenience store on the corner together. One of the surveillance on the across the street recognized, hey, I think our target just showed up. So everyone in both vehicles go into the convenience store, come back out, and now our target is in the white Buick with some unknown people. And at this point, they hadn't even made contact with our informant to say that they were there. They actually started running counter surveillance in the area, running through the parking lot just to see if there was police there or anything like that. They finally ended up landing into a parking spot, and the decision from my sergeant was like, all right, everyone's in place. Yes, move. And backing up even before that, the training that we were on this squad, the U.S. Marshals, and I'm going to throw his name out, Matt Hershey, who is one of the now premier instructors in I think it's Glencoe, Georgia, for the U.S. Marshals, was part of the U.S. Marshals group here in Phoenix, and would consistently lead us through really good training. Vehicle containments and shooting and stuff like that. So we had been doing some really good training leading up to this event. So decision was made to move, and I have a white Chevy truck with lights in it. My partner's on the side, and as soon as we hit the vehicle, all their doors will open and people start running, and the driver has a gun. He starts shooting over his shoulder at me. And so I move out, return fire, and in the meantime, I caught a bullet in the leg. My partner on the other side challenges one other person, shoots him, and funny story on that, and I tell this story in class. The guy had a Chinese throwing star. He took a Chinese throwing star to a gun battle, and he didn't win. And
that's movie stuff right there.
And our main target takes off running, drops a gun at the front of the car, and he got caught by perimeter units. So he gets caught. The driver starts shooting at me, and I return fire with my AR-15. My partner sees that he's shooting, and he returns fire from the backside of the vehicle. I get hit. I get moved out. We end up shooting and killing the bad guy that was shooting at me. But I didn't know that I was hit right away. And even going backwards in training, I had went to Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman training. I think saw him 2 or 3 times. Mindset. And part of his training talked about vasodilation and also auditory exclusion. I was firing an AR-15 with no hearing protection, and I don't have any repercussions from that. My partner's shooting near me, my sergeant shooting, I don't have any recollection of hearing. My leg, I get shot, I don't start bleeding right away. And I knew I was hit, and then as soon as my adrenaline dumped, that's when I started bleeding. So
you knew you were hit, or you did not know you were hit?
I did know I was hit.
Where were you hit at?
In the lower leg, below the knee.
Was it a through and through?
No, it actually hit my bone and ricocheted off the bone and lodged underneath my skin on the top of my shin. It was a 380 round, and it hit my bone and then lodged under the skin. Luckily, I didn't have to get surgery done, and I'll get to that. But
can you go through a metal detector today?
I can. But I also have the bullet, and I have it on a chain. So I had that recovered and removed, and so that's part of my...
I thought when you said you didn't have to go through surgery that they just said, hey, we're just going to leave it.
Oh, no. It lodged right on the top of my shin, and then they just almost like a pimple, cut it and popped it right out. So I didn't have to do like major surgery or anything like that, and I really lucked out.
No actual break to the bone?
No. Crazy story is the place on my bone that it hit was a old healed part where I broke my leg on an ATC accident and down in Rocky Point, Mexico. And that's where the strongest part of the bone was. That's where it healed. And that's exactly where the bullet hit.
So just
coincidence.
That extra calcification actually helped you.
Yeah.
From being previously broken.
Yes.
Not recommend everybody go out and break bones, but
it just you look back at how things just in your life and things happen and for a reason. And in this case, it was like, did that happen because of that? Who knows? But I was protected. Training was part of it. It was a crazy gun battle in the afternoon in the parking lot of a grocery store. And part of the training through the Lieutenant Colonel Grossman is that mindset. No, this is what's going to happen, and now you're prepared for it, so it's not a shock to you. You can't just teach being in a gun battle in the academy, or you can kind of try to simulate that in training, but some of it you just can't. You have to go through it. So now I'm on scene. They moved me away from the vehicle just to get me to the triage area, and someone at some point in time, the guy who had the Chinese throwing star, he doesn't die, and they moved and brought him and sat him down next to me in the triage area. And in my mind, I'm thinking that's the guy who just shot me, and so I started yelling at him. And I'm like, wait, and real quick and then I even undrew my holster, or unholstered my gun, and I thought, oh, that's probably not a good idea. So I holstered it again, pulled my taser out, and I painted him with the taser. And in our organization, if you're in a shooting, you have a sergeant assigned to you. They stay with you the entire time. And so the sergeant that was with me was like, oh, hold on. And then they end up moving the guy. I don't know what the decision was to bring one of the suspects and sit him next to me but
was this like the initial triage point for medical to start, EMTs and stuff, to at least start looking at you?
Correct. And I don't think they thought about bad guy cop shooting stuff like that.
They were just containing all of the medical people who needed medical attention.
Correct. Yeah. So they finally get me transport me to the emergency room, and I had been married a month at this time. So now I had to, I didn't initially think about calling my wife. What I thought about was, hey, the guys on my squad, we were all close. We all knew each other. Our families knew each other, wives and everybody. And so my thing was, hey, I don't want someone from the department that she doesn't know to knock on the door, because that would be bad. One of the guys from my squad needs to go get her. And and I'll remember this to the day I die, is an old SWAT sergeant that was kind of there. And he's like, hold on, stop. You need to call her. She needs to hear your voice. You're okay. She needs to hear your voice. So then I had to take a deep breath. Hello, honey. Guess what? I just got shot. I'm okay. And I'm going to the hospital. Someone's going to pick you up. I don't want you driving. Someone's going to pick you up. And so that was her crash course to being married to law enforcement. And to this day, I mean, I'm very, very thankful at the training I did receive, mindset training, everything like that, to be able to not think, just react to what we had, the threat and everything like that. And going back to teaching aspect, I would teach and tell that same story for recruits that were just getting out of the police academy, going to the street. And even with my current job, I end my training sessions, 3-day training sessions, with that story, just to try to help others. If there's any part of it that maybe resonates with someone else that can help them, whether it be mentally or physically, training, anything like that, I wanted to make sure that I can now give back from my story.
Right. Did the immediate short term after that, was there any residual injury that kind of kept you down for a while, or were you able to get right back to work quickly?
Well, funny story on that. I'm in the hospital and pretty drugged up. The fire captain that was on the transport was awesome. He's like, "Oh, you need some more demo? Okay, here you go." And it was a great ride. I was happy as can be. And I'm telling my wife, "Hey, I got a golf tournament this weekend." And she's like, "You just got shot. You're not golfing." And fast forward 4 or 5 days, golf tournament comes around. I had my buddy pick me up, and I went on crutches, and they put me in the golf cart, and it was a scramble. I didn't have to really do anything, and they'd drive up to the ball, and I'd hit it. I didn't want to be cooped up inside feeling like I was a victim. I wanted to get out. Now, in retrospect, that decision haunts me every time I get a sniffle, cough, complain about any ache or pain. My wife was like, "Who? Stop. You went golfing after you got shot. So I do not want to hear any complaining for you about anything." And so in retrospect, I'm like, maybe I shouldn't have done that golf tournament.
But like the residual trauma around that injury, you didn't break any bones.
Right.
So ultimately you escaped it unscathed?
Yes. I escaped it unscathed. I went through rehab, a short rehab. The best way I can describe it, it felt like I got hit in the shin with a baseball bat. And for like the first week after that, it was extremely painful. I had to be on crutches. And then once I got through probably about 6 weeks of rehab, I was back to full duty physically. And then 6 months later, I ran a triathlon, a short-term triathlon, and did stuff like that physically. So I never had any long-term physical at all, and really worked hard towards that. It was the mental stuff and the PTSD that came after that is what really, really kind of hindered me, if you will. And I didn't even know what was going on, and didn't have anyone to really coach me in that aspect, what to expect either.
Looking back on it in hindsight, how soon were you seeing what you now realize was ramifications of PTSD?
Probably 2 or 3 months after the shooting. I was in a grocery store and paid for something. I can't even remember what it was. It was a couple dollars, and I used a 20. And the poor girl, the cashier, didn't have ones and fives to give me, and she gave me change. Well, she had ones, she didn't have fives or tens. Ones and quarters is cash, and it set me off. Like, I was so upset that I got all this change, and it was just a little minor thing, and I can remember being so hyper vigilant and just so upset at that. And then a couple other things within once I got back to work, and hesitating on where I would never hesitate before, doing surveillance or stuff like that. My sergeant that I had at the time, he didn't know. He's like, I didn't know what to do with you. I just wanted you to get better. And so I put you back into training as much as I could. And I would hesitate, and I could really feel myself, just the anxiety start creeping up. And I didn't really know what it was, but now looking back on it, that's exactly what it was.
And what year was this?
This was in 2012.
So we're going on a decade now from it. In general, I would say law enforcement at that time was probably just starting to really kind of look at the mental health aspect. Was it something going back to that point? Did you end up getting help driving the train yourself, or was there somebody who kind of said, hey, you need to go do A, B, or C?
I did it myself. There was no, and you're absolutely right. That was right at the beginning where they had we had peer groups and stuff like that would come out, but not anything that had to deal with people getting shot or being officer while shooting. And it was, all right, you're going to have to go to the psychiatrist to get returned to duty, but nothing other than that. So I went out on my own. I sought help on my own, knowing I'm like, hey, I probably should go see some counseling just to talk, tell my story, see what I can do for tools to get better. And crazy part about that is the first counselor, I sat in the office. I didn't know who it was going to be. Got into the office of the counselor, and I started looking on the wall at the certificates in Northern Arizona University. And I'm like, well, that's kind of a coincidence. And then when she came in, when we started talking, we started putting two and two together. We grew up right around the corner from each other. She was about 5 or 6 years younger than me. Her dad was the chief of police up in Flagstaff, and I knew her older sister, and it was just this coincidence, but it immediately gave us a bond. And she helped me tremendously for the next 6-7 years, even when she wasn't working for that same office. And then fast forward to when I retired a couple years ago, she reached out to me also. And so it was a really, really, I got lucky that I got her right off the bat, and then continued to get counseling forward to get better.
And I want to ask this not in the sense of any type of, there's not a negative behind it, but you said you worked with her for 6 or 7 years. Did you feel that you needed to keep talking to her for that length of time? Or was it more her saying, hey, I want you to keep coming back?
The first 2 years were the most important, but then maybe it was every 6 months. So I say 6 or 7 years, but it was long periods of time. It just got longer and longer after it was.
Got it.
And her thing was, hey, if you have anything come, and there was different traumas that came up in my career after that I felt comfortable reaching back out to her. And that was kind of when we worked together. It was, hey, if you ever need anything, reach back out. And that's kind of where we were at.
So was the subsequent trauma and continued work with her not necessarily because you felt yourself going backwards, it was just to prevent yourself from going backwards?
Correct. And then other things that happened, you learn how organizations are and how they treat you, because initially everyone is very supportive and they want to help you and your family. And once you get back to duty and in law enforcement, people have very short memories. And within our organization, some of the PTSDs, the stuff that I was going through and crankiness, and I wasn't pleasant. And I didn't really want to talk to anybody unless they were my immediate squad. And we had a change in leadership within our squad, and the new sergeant and I didn't see eye to eye. And he used that against me and pushed me off the squad, moved me into our fusion center, and didn't even give me the opportunity to pack up my desk, had the rest of the squad mates load up all my stuff from my desk and everything and deliver it to me on a cart. The other piece of that is my pants had got cut off from the initial triage, and it was, I don't know, $45 worth. It took the agency like 9 months to reimburse me for a pair of pants. So little agency, I call it system, internal organization trauma, if you will. And that started setting me off. And so I would call her. I'm like, hey, this happened. But it goes back to that resiliency thing. I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to let this defeat me. I'm going to keep moving forward. Those people are going to be the way that they are, which now pushed me to start testing for sergeant. And so it gave me the opportunity and the time to be able to test for sergeant. I got it the first go around and got promoted. I promoted to sergeant in 2015.
And spent the last how many years?
The last 6 years, because I retired in May of 2021. 6 years as a sergeant. 3 of those I got back onto a street crimes unit as a sergeant. Going back to use my experience, all the stuff as a detective, and now I was able to give my detectives that type of experience. But I have to talk about this. First patrol squad as a sergeant, graveyard shift, working weekends, you have crappy days off, and
promote, go back to the bottom.
Yes. And I remember going into the first graveyard squad.
And they wonder why nobody wants to promote.
Right. And I call it the kindergarten class, because they were all rookie officers that couldn't get any better shift than that, just like me. And they're stuck with graveyard shift, and they're all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. They're ready to go. They hadn't been jaded in their career yet. They were clean slate, if you will. And I really, really latched onto that and enjoyed that teaching part of that with these young officers.
And every one of us who's come out of the academy and been that junior guy on that weekend night shift, those sergeants and lieutenants have such a lasting impact on us, because it's really what molds us and our careers. And every one of us knows this. There was the sergeants we loved working for and the sergeants we didn't love working for. Oddly enough, they both end up being mentors to us, because as you promote up, you're like, I'm never going to be like that
Absolutely.
one. I want to be like that one.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that was exactly it. I wanted to give them a good taste of coming out on the street and giving them a good experience. You know, I had 15 years on in law enforcement at that point in time. So, I didn't take things big, you know, I didn't make big things out of little. And so it was fun. I really enjoyed that teaching aspect, but then I really longed to get back into surveillance and long-term investigations and that world. And I finally did get back onto a street crimes unit as a sergeant. Did that right up until the last year I was like, you know what, I don't want to be on call anymore. I don't want to carry that extra phone and have all those responsibilities. So I went back to a day shift patrol as a sergeant for the last year of my career.
With all the dinosaurs.
With all the dinosaurs, which is a whole different, you go from the kindergarten class to the dinosaurs who are jaded and don't want to do anything, and it's completely different.
How soon before you retired were you already planning to continue and do some type of work after retirement? Because you mentioned teaching. Was that in your plan, or did that kind of come unexpectedly?
It was in my plan. That first squad I told you about with the senior detectives that taught me, I learned really quick how to utilize cell phone records for tracking down bad guys and putting suspects on crime scenes by mapping their phone calls, and then running pen register, trap and trace, T3 wiretaps, all of that stuff I learned, and I was like, I really enjoyed it. So then as I went on in my career as a gang detective, I had a case where I put it all together for cell phones. I kept going to training. I went to advanced training after advanced training. And then I got to a point where I was like, that transition between where I promoted to sergeant and got off that other squad, that's all I was doing was cell phone stuff for the entire organization. And I got to be a subject matter expert in that. And I'm like, this is really what I want to do going forward. Because I knew that at some point I did not want to retire and then go work in another law enforcement capacity, like for another agency or something like that. And so I figured this was going to be my ticket. And as I kept going, I would teach classes within our organization. So I taught cell phone investigations to all our detectives starting in like 2014.
As a train the trainer type position, or actually as a representative for the company whose platform you were using?
No, I trained the trainer. So I created my own training class for our detectives within the organization, and would just hold, every 6 months I'd have a training class. and it tells as many people as wanted to show up and do that. Dispatch, I would train dispatch and cell phone stuff and what they can receive from the cell phone carriers. And then the company that I ultimately ended up going to work for, I had went through their training class because they had a software system that would process all of these cell phone records. So before, let's just say I got cell phone records that were 5,000 data points, I would have to hand map all of that. And it'd take a long period of time. This software system would process it within a minute, 2 minutes, and now put it on a map for you. And so it was awesome. So I started going to those training classes and got to know the owner of that company, which was local here in Arizona. And then leading up to where I knew that I was going to plan on retire. So I was eligible to retire in May of 2020. And I had taken these classes, had been in touch with him. Hey, if you're going to hire another investigator or teacher, I would like to be part of that. So we went out and I talked to him and kind of give me an informal interview. Even before that, that partner that was with me on the officer involved shooting, he went to work for that company. So he had already retired at this point in time, and he was working for that company. So he was also another in for me. Then May of 2020, spring of 2020, that's when COVID hit and all training got shut down. And so all of their training classes got canceled, and he called me up. He's like, hey.
They didn't even go virtual. They just all shut down.
They went virtual eventually, but he wasn't able to hire me at that point in time. And so I was like, okay, no problem. So I went into our drop program right then. And then February of 2021, I get a phone call from him. He's like, all right, training classes are starting to come back up. Are you still interested? I'm like, absolutely. So I used, because I had a bunch of sick time saved up, and I used some sick time to piggyback off of their instructor and just to go see what the curriculum was. And on top of that software, they still do, it teaches a 40-hour cell phone investigations class. It's mixed between basic and intermediate, 5 days, 40 hours. And so I was piggybacking off of that just to see what the curriculum was. And then ultimately, he hired me, and I put in my paperwork, and I was teaching those classes, or helping learn to teach those classes in May of 2021.
Did that company require you to go to any additional formal training before you could start training for them?
They didn't require it. I had already been through their subject matter expert training from that same company. So I'd already been through all of their courses, and I'd already testified as a subject matter expert in the court system here in Arizona previously. So it was then at that point on the job training. So then a month after I started with that company, we got bought out by a bigger company. And so now I'm employed by LexisNexis. They bought out the small ZX. And so now I am an employee of LexisNexis, and I am teaching a 3-day fugitive apprehension class using cellular investigations. That's I'm the main instructor for that.
Did they already have that class, or did they let you develop that class?
They had that class. My partner that I had been in the shooting with, he was the main instructor for that. I started teaching the 40-hour class, and I started, it took me about 8 months to where I could go solo. It's just a lot of material to learn as an instructor. And then he ended up leaving the organization and going out on his own, doing his own training and doing other stuff. So then that fell into my lap. And so I've been the primary instructor for that since August of last year.
And is it kind of have subject course will travel? I mean, are you all over the country?
All over the country. I've now taught at 45 different police agencies, everywhere from, how about this? The first month I was there, they were like, hey, we got a training class in Maui. Are you able to go? Really? Absolutely. And the other instructors, they didn't want to be gone for a week from their families, or they just couldn't for whatever reason. And me and my wife, all our kids are grown and out of the house, so it was not a big deal. And so I was like, yeah, sure, pick me. And so I taught at Maui.
Pack a bag. You're training in Maui.
Yeah. And then even last year, I taught Alaska State Troopers up in Anchorage, Alaska. It was amazing. I've taught it in Miami Police Department, Rhode Island State Police. I just got back from New Jersey last week. So it's been really nice traveling and meeting other law enforcement all over the country, and different, I mean, everyone has their different challenges within their courts, within their organization, but for the most part, everyone's mindset and outlook is the same. And it's really comforting to know that. And it's been fun meeting all these people.
You hit on something that I think is really important. And part of the message that I want to get out with this podcast is the thinking about what you're going to do post-retirement or law enforcement career. And you hit the nail on the head in that you identified something that maybe might anybody else just kind of been like, oh, I learned, how to track a cell phone. But it's taking that piece and then realizing that's where my value is going to be going forward. And so my long way around to this is go work the 100-mile-an-hour teams. Have all the fun. Make your career enjoyable, but also be looking at what skill set is going to be able to transfer when you're ready to leave. And like you said, you've been able to leverage this into a fugitive apprehension class, but it's still technology-based.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's in my wheelhouse. And so now I'm going and I'm teaching all these people all over the country. Yeah, it's specific to what I know, but a lot of it still translates to, the mindset part, preparing. Just because you find a cell phone for your bad guy doesn't mean they're going to come out with their hands up saying, oh, you got me now. So now what piece is that? What training can you do to now leverage and be the safest, best prepared detective to be able to handle these situations? And if I can give any part of my experience to help these guys, that's what I want to do. I feel like there's no greater good than to be able to give back. And law enforcement was, 20 plus years of my life, and I really enjoyed it. All of the bad and the good. It put me to a position now where I can possibly help others. And that's really what I wanted to get to. Initially, when I was early in my career, I was like, maybe I'll, maybe I'll come out and I'll be a judge. I'd like to be a judge. And then politics in that, and then I thought also, maybe I want to become a chief of police. Oh no, I got to the level that I wanted at sergeant, and that was it. And I didn't want to deal with the politics going forward. I wanted to be able to help the ground level people.
Going way, way back, and obviously talking about baseball, have you stayed connected to baseball through all of this?
I did for a short time. I volunteered as a coach for a Catholic school in Chandler, and was the JV baseball coach for 2-3 years. And that was when I was still on patrol, so I could take days off and manipulate my schedule to accommodate it. Then once I got on the undercover squads and being on call, it didn't work out for me. Then about 10 years ago, a cousin of mine was coaching a summer league for a high school team. And I helped coach that for a couple of years, the summer league team. And then ultimately, when I do retire, I'd like to get back into college or maybe high school level coaching, junior college, if anything. But I want to get back into it.
I wanted to ask just because it sounds like it was such an important part of your life growing up. And I wondered if, you were able to kind of stay connected to it in any way.
Yeah, just those a couple of times. I think about, well, am I going to be, it's been a while since I've been into that arena, but baseball doesn't change a whole lot. It's still pitch, you throw, you hit, you run. And I feel like my experience teaching others in whatever, in law enforcement can now translate into teaching young kids and baseball and life and being resilient and all that. So eventually that's what I really want to do. I told my wife when I'm retired, stop traveling. I want to get on coaching at some point.
I want to wrap this up by going back to talking about the mental health aspect and how you recognize that you needed to talk to somebody. You professionally talked to a psychologist for multiple years. Retiring and stepping away from active law enforcement, did you find that it had a positive impact on your mental health, or just kind of no impact at all?
Positive, 100% positive. And I didn't know it right away. I retired, went right to work, traveling, and I still don't even feel like it's work. I enjoy traveling. I enjoy doing that. 6 months after I retired, I remember this distinctly. I was in the Atlanta airport, connecting with a flight, and it hit me. I was like, this is what it's like to be back in the civilian world. This is what it's like to deal with people that have jobs and are cordial to each other, that aren't complaining and calling me names and having the worst day of their life, and us having to, have a conversation. And it really hit me. It was like, man, this is cool. This is good. And everyone I deal with in class, they want to be there. They signed up to be at that class. And it really was positive on the aspect that for so many years you're in a negative world. You're in a world where people are having the worst part of their day, or you're arresting someone and they're going to go to prison for the rest of their life and they don't want to, or they're shooting at you. And that was normal. And when it hit me, I was like, wow, this is kind of cool. And it was really refreshing. And now I transitioned to where I try not to watch the news, and that's another part of it. I quit watching the news, social media very, very rarely, and now all of the negative part of the world is gone from my world, and it's been nice to meet and be around people that are just good quality people.
If anybody's got any more questions, maybe they're interested in getting into the same kind of training that you're doing now, can they reach out to you?
Absolutely. I can leave you with my email address, and they could reach out to me. We're all over the country. Like I said, that fugitive class, the 40-hour class, and if you're an investigator, it's one of the classes that, and I'm not just tooting my own horn, but routinely people are like, yeah, I've been in law enforcement 20 years. That's the best training class that I've ever been to. The way that it's set up, it's not just all lecture, it's practical exercises. You're working actual cases on the computer, hunting down fugitives, learning about the technology and what you can get from all the phone carriers and everything like that. So really, really good class. And yeah, if they're in an agency that they're one of those squads, it'd be beneficial for them.
From a potential secondary career aspect, is LexisNexis a company that is pro law enforcement and that they really like to onboard law enforcement and they embrace former law enforcement?
They do. They have the group that I work with. There is, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us. The only one who's not former law enforcement is my boss, who is prior Green Beret, 30 years Green Beret, but he taught in Iraq how to hunt fugitives to the Iraqi police. So he understands it. And then the other part of our group that helps with cases all over the country, whether it be testifying as an expert witness or anything, they're all prior law enforcement as well. And then we have a whole nother group that education that teaches the methodology and how to use the platform for LexisNexis. So yeah, they're really, really big government and pro police, and the owner of the CEO of the company, very, very big police supporter, and he backs a lot of the child exploitation investigations and stuff like that. So yeah, they're constantly hiring. Even if you don't have a background in the cell phone stuff, there's other parts of there's a need for that liaison between corporate America and law enforcement. Just they know how to talk the talk within law enforcement, so they hire a lot of prior law enforcement.
Well, I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. It's been great talking.
All the best going forward.
I appreciate that.
Your second career.
My wife calls it my encore career.
There you go.
So I'll keep going and keep spreading the word.
Well, I appreciate it.
Thanks, Paul.
I appreciate you watching. But before you go, if you like the video, please hit that subscribe button. Also, any comments are appreciated. Thank you.